The signature drink of Sex and the City was the Cosmopolitan. How did that happen?
Up until that point, besides Julia Child drinking wine, there weren't many women drinking on TV. Carrie Bradshaw orders a Cosmo. Here was this very feminine drink. It's in a martini glass, but it's pink. A lot of girls couldn't afford Louboutins or a Coach purse, but women could afford to order a Cosmo. So women wanted to be like Carrie. They wanted to feel literally cosmopolitan. And all of a sudden, the drink swept the nation like wildfire. It really became the first cocktail that women were influenced from the media to order. And people still drink it today.
Do you have a thirst to learn about wine? Do you love stories about wonderfully obsessive people, hauntingly beautiful places, and amusingly awkward social situations? Well, that's the blend here on the Unreserved Wine Talk podcast. I'm your host, Natalie McLean, and each week I share with you unfiltered conversations with celebrities in the wine world, as well as confessions from my own tipsy journey as I write my third book on this subject. I'm so glad you're here. Now pass me that bottle, please, and let's get started. Welcome to episode 159. How did the Cosmopolitan become an iconic cocktail on the TV show Sex and the City? Did you know that an illegal shipment of champagne revolutionized the entire industry? Which women were responsible for America's increase in both scotch and bourbon consumption after Prohibition? You'll hear those stories and more in part 2 of our chat with Mallory O'Meara, author of the wonderful, just published book, Girly Drinks, A World History of Women and Alcohol. If you missed the first part last week, no worries. You can still listen to this one now, but then go back and take a listen afterwards, as it was lots of fun. Now, on a personal note, before we dive into the show, as I mentioned last week, several publishers are interested in publishing my new wine memoir. Yay! I am still in discussions with the editors to decide which house to go with, and that's fun. Even the publishers, though, who said no, have given me a lot of great insight into the book's potential and positioning when it comes out. It's also opened my eyes to just how different tastes are when it comes to reading. I'm going to share some of the nice no's from the UK, where my audience isn't as big as it is in Canada and the US. This is sort of like reading mean tweets, except they're not mean. In publishing these days, you really need to have what they call a platform, which is a built-in audience that you bring with you and who will pre-order the book as soon as it's available. Hint, hint, if you're listening right now, please buy it for friends and family and help spread the word. They're really looking for that. So one UK publisher said to my agent, quote, "I've been completely absorbed by Natalie's story, but I can't see us finding a way to make it work in our market," end quote. Another said, "It's a pacey read and the wine interludes are really inventive, but I worry we might struggle with this commercially here." And a third said, "It's a great and moving read and I really enjoyed it. Natalie has definitely been through a great deal, but she tells her story with wit and honesty. It's a fab read, but in the end, I'm afraid I don't think we could make it quite big enough here in the UK," end quote. So I almost wish these publishers would write the back book cover blurbs. I'll share some more terribly kind rejections with you next week. But you can see how important it is for publishers to know that you have almost an army of loyal fans who will support the book before publishers will even consider taking a flyer on it. There's just so much competition for attention these days with social media and streaming TV and life generally. If you're interested in being a beta reader and getting a sneak peek at this manuscript, please email me at natalie@nataliemclean.com. I'd also love to hear from you if you've discovered a fabulous new wine we should know about, a tip that would help us enjoy wine more, or a question for me. Anything at all, as long as it's wine related and you keep it clean. Send me your sips, tips, and questions to natalie@nataliemclean.com. I'll give you a shout out in the next episode unless you prefer to remain anonymous. I also have a bonus for you at the end of this episode. I'm sharing my favorite wines for the holidays in a chat with Kathy Buckworth on her podcast, Go To Grandma. I'll share more details with you later in this podcast, as well as a clip of our chat to get you all set for the holidays. In the show notes, you'll find a full transcript of my conversation, both with Mallory and Kathy, links to Mallory's new book, her podcast and website, links to Kathy's podcast and website, how you can join me in a free online wine and food pairing class, and where you can find the live stream of the video version of this conversation on Facebook and YouTube every Wednesday at 7 p.m. That's all in the show notes at nataliemclean.com/159. Okay, on with the show. Now, moving on to the Cosmopolitan, because I'm very excited. The reboot of Sex and the City is launching in December. I watched that many years ago. But the signature drink of Sex and the City was the Cosmopolitan. How did that happen?
Yeah, the Cosmopolitan is a really cool chapter in women's drinking history because up until that point, besides Julia Child drinking wine, there weren't many women drinking on TV. There weren't many, as we would think of them today, drinks influencers. Women really weren't sure what to order because on shows you would see men drinking scotch, men drinking martinis. So men were like, oh, well, those are man drinks. That's what I'm going to drink. And women didn't really have that kind of cultural guidance. All of a sudden, I think it was season 2, early on in the season, Carrie Bradshaw orders a Cosmo. Here was this very feminine drink. It's in a martini glass, but it's pink. And in that show, they have all these purses and shoes, and there's a lot of things that women wanted to buy after seeing one of the 4 girls wearing them or having them. But a lot of the stuff that's featured on the show is not accessible or affordable to a modern audience. A lot of girls couldn't afford Louboutins or a Coach purse, but women could afford to order a Cosmo. So women wanted to be like Carrie. They wanted to feel literally cosmopolitan. They wanted to feel fancy. And all of a sudden, the drink swept the nation like wildfire. I mean, men were ordering it too, but it really became the first cocktail that women were influenced from the media to order. And I mean, people still drink it today.
Right. It hasn't gone out of style.
No, it's a good cocktail.
Has it evolved? Are there any modern twists that you find interesting on the Cosmo?
Yeah, actually, another woman that I feature in the book in the 2000s chapter is Julie Reiner. She is a bartender and a really important person in the cocktail world. She created the Flatiron Lounge, which was really the first mass appeal cocktail bar in New York City. She really was one of the forerunners of the craft cocktail movement. But she created a really cool twist on the Cosmo. It's a blood orange Cosmo. So instead of using cranberry, she uses blood orange juice. Look online, or I have the recipe for it on my website. But it's a really, really cool, fun twist on a classic drink.
Oh, must look beautiful, like a sunset or something. Yeah.
Yes, it's a gorgeous drink.
Awesome. And yet today now we see a lot of women drinking. It seems to be all the legal shows, or maybe those are just the ones I'm watching, but like Scandal and The Good Wife, and so many have got these oversized glasses of wine. What do you think has flipped the switch there? Did it start with Carrie and then...
I think it did. I mean, it really did start with Julia Child in the 1960s. She was one of the very, very first to sort of normalize women drinking. Again, drinking just not to be drunk, not anything, just having a glass of wine while you're cooking, just sort of very normal, non-problematic drinking. But I would say certainly Carrie Bradshaw is sort of immortalized in drinking history because it became just kind of a normal thing for all those 4 Sex and the City girls. They would go get drinks after work. It really helped normalize it. So I think all those shows, Succession and Mad Men, any women drinking in a TV show, I think owes a little bit to Carrie Bradshaw.
Absolutely. So yeah, I think of Mad Men and their scotch, I guess, or whiskey on the rocks or whatever they're drinking. But there's even a female aspect to those manly man drinks, or what we think of as male drinks. What about scotch and bourbon and whiskey?
Oh, I mean, there was so much women's history in those types of alcohols. Today we think of them as such masculine drinks, and they're really imbued with this idea of masculinity and being a man. But almost all of them started out as women's drinks. Even post-Prohibition, the most popular drink with women in the 1940s was a old-fashioned. Women were really, really important to bourbon, to the creation of scotch, to the creation of whiskey. In Ireland during the famine, it was women who were moonshining, who were distilling whiskey to just get extra calories because they needed it. In Scotch history, the woman who convinced America post-Prohibition to start drinking Scotch again was a woman named Bessie Williamson. It was not someone who looked like Nick Offerman. It was not someone with a beard. It was not someone smoking a cigar. It was a Scottish woman wearing a lot of wool and tweed and having cat's eye glasses that came over from Scotland and traveled to all sorts of bars and in liquor stores to convince people to drink single malt Scotch.
And was she targeting women or just everybody?
Everybody. She was actually tasked by the Scotch Association from Scotland. She was the first and only so far female general manager of the Laphroaig distillery. And she was giving all these interviews and doing all this great stuff over at Laphroaig. And the Scotch Association was so enamored with her passion and her excitement for Scotch that they wanted her to be their ambassador to the United States. So she came over during a time when people weren't drinking single malt scotches. They were drinking blends. People weren't shelling out for expensive, fancy scotches. And she convinced people that customers, people going to the bar, drinkers everywhere would want to buy something a little more high quality and were ready for a very smoky, peaty, what we would think of today as a masculine scotch. But it was this little woman from Scotland who was its forerunner.
I can just imagine her the way you've just given me a few details, the cat eyes,
Yes.
the wolves.
She was fantastic.
Awesome. And then there was somebody, Margie Samuels, she also had an association with, I guess, bourbon.
Yes. So a very well-known bourbon today. She was sort of the person who put it on the map back in the 1960s. Every single bottle of whiskey on the shelf looked the same. There was no embellishments. There was no gimmicks. There was no fancy, today when you go to a liquor store, all the labels looks like works of art. There's a lot of color. There's a lot of difference in the shapes of the bottles. Not so back then. So her and her husband had wanted to create a bourbon. Her husband, Bill, his family had been historically distillers, so they collaborated on this really cool type of bourbon that they wanted to make, but she wanted her bottle to stand out. So she hauled her deep fryer from the kitchen down into the basement and spent months doing experiments. She was very inspired by cognac bottles and wanted to do something cool and experimenting with different colors of wax and different types of wax. And finally, she came out and pulled something out of her basement and realized and said, "All right, Bill, this is what our bottle is going to look like." And that was Maker's Mark. That very distinctive red dripping wax was all from Marge, and it became an instant sensation because it stood out so much on the shelf. And she completely revolutionized the bourbon and whiskey marketing world.
That is amazing. And she did it in her deep fryer.
Yes, she put a bunch of wax in there and did a bunch of experiments. Again, so much of drinking history happens in kitchens, which is why it was amazing to me that this women's history was left out.
Yes, absolutely. Now, touch on Veuve Clicquot. We have talked to Tilar Mezio, who wrote the...
Yeah, she wrote this incredible biography.
Isn't it great? It was great.
Oh, it's so good.
I love the story of Barbe Nicole Clicquot. And you talk about happening in the kitchen. She's the one who used her kitchen table.
Kitchen table, yes.
To do what?
So back then, one of the biggest obstacles to producing champagne quickly, this was in the 1800s, was all the residue that was in the wine. And they had all these different methods, flicking the top off and trying to pour some of the debris out. But none of them were quick. And the quicker it was, the worse the champagne was. If you wanted a champagne that was very clear and didn't have that cloudy debris, it took a really long time. And she figured out, again, hauling her kitchen table down to the basement, she had all these slanted holes drilled in the table, and she stored the wine upside down on its neck so that all the debris collected at the top of the bottle, so that when you pop the cork out, all the debris shot out, and then you could pop the top back on, and it was perfect. It was such a revolution. She was starting to make her very, very popular champagne very quickly, and her competitors could not for the life of them figure out how she was doing it. It was such a strange new thing, and her workers were so loyal to her that for a decade, no one ever shared the secret of how she was doing it, and it drove the other people in the champagne industry crazy. Moet, which is her biggest competitor at the time, was pulling his hair out, trying to figure out how she did it, but it was just her and her kitchen table.
I love that. I love it. And the whole technique of remuage or riddling to get the spent yeast cells down into the neck of the bottle is fundamental, as you say, to having a clear champagne, which became very marketable. And then she was one of the first to get through the Napoleonic blockades, wasn't she?
Yeah, what she really did was she revolutionized and internationalized the champagne market. What happened was during the Russian occupation of France, during those Napoleonic Wars, a lot of them were in the Champagne region of France, even at her, Barbe Nicole's estate. And instead of pillaging the place, they ended up buying bottles from all these winemakers, and they fell in love with champagne, which during that time period, they didn't think of it as champagne like we do today. They just thought it was sparkling wine, from the Champagne region of France, but they fell in love with it. When they went back to Russia after the wars were over, they carried that taste with them. So she had sent this illegal, I will say, shipment of champagne over to Russia to capitalize on it. And because she was the only person who tried to get through that blockade, as soon as the ship landed with all this incredible, very clear, delicious champagne, it went like gangbusters. She sold the entire shipment. I think the Tsar of Russia at the time said he would drink no other wine. So it wasn't just that the Russians had developed a reputation for loving the champagne. It was her champagne in particular that had gotten this like special love in the hearts of Russia and started to spread to other countries. And soon she really became an international celebrity.
And of course, back then, the influencers of the day were the people of the court. So as soon as they start drinking it, everybody wants to. But she also, just reading bits and pieces of her history over time, I'm not sure if it was when the Germans were invading France, because of course France is at the crossroads, especially Champagne. They were taking the bottles and she said, let them take them. They'll be back. Like the first sampling campaigns. Okay. No charge for the first hit.
Yes. She was very, very confident in her champagne. And it was that confidence in herself and her product and the wine she made that really is a hallmark of all the special things that she did in her career.
Yeah, especially as a young woman. I think she was 28 and had an 8-year-old daughter, Clementine.
Yes,
so she was
widowed.
Exactly. Veuve means widow. So yes, that was remarkable too. At a time when women weren't in business at all, she built one of the best luxury brands the world has known.
She sold her jewelry to help pay for it in the beginning. She really was a self-powered woman. Such an incredible story.
That is amazing. And then there's one other woman you mentioned who changed the style of champagne.
Yes, Louise Pommery. The cool thing about her is that even back then and today still, we think of less sweet wines as more of a masculine wine when she was the person who invented dry champagne. Because back then, everyone wanted very, very sweet champagne. There was no market for it, and it was more difficult to make a drier champagne because you needed to have perfectly ripe grapes. You needed more time to age it. So everyone thought, why bother with it? Why would we spend more time and more money on something that the people don't want? And she thought, no, I really want to try this. I want to make this special champagne. So what she did is she told this vineyard, okay, I will buy your entire stock. I will guarantee you that you will sell all of your grapes, but you have to pick them exactly the time that I say that you will. And they did, and she got her grapes and she got her wine and she created the very first mass marketed dry champagne. And it became a hit. People were very excited about it. It was very delicious. And all of a sudden we had a totally new style of champagne.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think the British were really keen for it.
Yes.
And I'm not sure if this is accurate, but I think that's why the French called dry champagne brut, as in the English have a brutal sense of taste, a savage sense of taste. Yeah, they like the dry stuff.
The French were very grumpy because it was actually a British person who had figured out how to make champagne, how to make sparkling wine in the first place, which I don't think the French will ever forgive the British for.
No, they want their Dom Perignon story.
Yes,
who
they
was great
really
at blending,
do.
But was trying to get the bubbles out of the, the wine.
It's such a common misconception. People think that he invented champagne, but like you said, he was tasked by his fellow monks to get these terrible bubbles out of their wine.
Wrecking it. You've had so many wonderful women and stories. Was there anyone you were intrigued by, but you had to leave out just for the sake of not having, a 1,000-page book?
There were a few female bootleggers that I had to leave out just because the Prohibition chapter is the longest chapter in the book. It could have been an entire book. There are so many incredible women in that time period. When you look at most history books of the time period or of cocktails or drinking history, they really only talk about women in regards to the Women's Christian Temperance Union, which was sort of this group of women who were gung-ho about getting rid of alcohol. But the truth is most women were on the other side, very pro-alcohol and really wanted to get repeal in there. So there was all sorts of amazing drinkers, bartenders, speakeasy hostesses, lawyers, politicians, all sorts of cool women that I got to write about. And of course, Cleo Lithgow, who was the bootlegger who guides you through that chapter. So there was a couple other bootleggers that I had to leave out a little bit. There was Bertie Brown, who was a Black female bootlegger in Minnesota, I believe. and just a few others. But these bootleggers, we think of them as like these sexy, gun-toting, tough ladies, but most of them were just women in their kitchens trying to feed their kids, trying to provide for their community. It was so much less dangerous and more of a domestic activity, and there were countless cool women bootlegging during that time period. When Prohibition first started, male enforcement agents were not allowed to search women because it was considered improper. They didn't want to touch women. Women were still wearing skirts down to their ankles at that point. So women took full advantage of that and would smuggle gallons and gallons of things in baby carriages, under their skirts, in their jackets. Eventually, the enforcement agencies caught on and started to hire female enforcement agents to be able to search them. But women really took advantage of it for a few years.
I love that. I love that. So the quote often attributed to Hemingway, but misattributed, is write drunk, edit sober. Do you drink anything when you write?
Yes, I'm a big bourbon person. If I'm writing past 5 p.m., which happens frequently, I like a little bit of Buffalo Trace specifically is my favorite bourbon, just to get me in the mindset. I have a writer friend, she always burns a certain candle when she writes, or some people put on a certain playlist. So having, my drink, all my little things, all of a sudden my brain says, yes, it's time to write. I'm in the writing mode now.
Oh, that's great. Do you have a favorite cocktail?
Yes, even though bourbon's my favorite type of alcohol, a daiquiri is my favorite cocktail.
And what's in a daiquiri, just for those who don't know?
It's just rum, simple syrup, and lime. And I love a simple cocktail. It's so delicious. I love a really, really good rum. So a daiquiri on a hot summer day is just perfect for me.
Oh, that sounds good. Do you have a least favorite cocktail or drink?
Yeah, I have a few. I'm not big on a lot of really bitter things. So I don't like Fernet and I don't like Campari and I don't like vermouth, which is very weird for a cocktail person. So I'm not a big Negroni fan. I'm not a big Manhattan fan, which again, not liking vermouth really takes a lot of cocktails off of the plate for me, but it just doesn't do it for me.
Your sensitivity to bitterness, I don't know if you've ever thought about it, but women tend to be super tasters. They have more taste buds. So maybe you are one. Maybe that sensitivity to bitter that's coming through in your drink choices.
That could be it, for sure. It just, it's a little too strong for me.
Yeah.
Even though I love drinking straight bourbon, I don't like Campari.
Sure. What about wine? Got any favorite wines?
There's one wine that I have been drinking a lot of lately called Cabin 5. It's a Zinfandel and it's very jammy. It's so delicious. My family is not a wine family. I never saw anybody drinking wine growing up except maybe some table wine on a holiday.
Because you are Irish ancestry, right?
Yes.
Beer and whiskey.
Yes, not a wine people. So I never really grew up thinking about pairing wines with foods. And it wasn't until I really started researching for Girly Drinks that I thought, oh, wow, I should really try to get into wine. So I signed up for one of those wine delivery monthly subscription boxes, and I really went to town. I like most wines, but a dark red is definitely my favorite. And this Cabin 5 has just been my favorite right now.
Wow. And what would you pair with it, if anything?
It goes really well with barbecue sauce, or we had it the other night with like some pulled tofu and barbecue sauce, which was really, really good. It's great for like a weeknight meal. Not a dessert wine or anything, but it's a great thing to have with like a hearty barbecue meal during the week.
And is there any childhood favorite food that you had that would pair well with that wine?
Probably not. Again, growing up in an Irish household, it was a lot of like boiled food.
Yes.
So there's
Scottish.
Yeah, you know the drill. So like I was a big fan of breakfast foods when I was a kid, eggs on toast and stuff. So maybe a breakfast stout, but I grew up in New England too. So not a lot of good food there. It wasn't until I had moved to California a few years ago that I started getting into the world of food and good wines. I still consider myself a novice there.
Sure. No, the world of pleasure awaits you. What do you hope changes as a result of your book?
For men reading it, I want their eyes to be sort of open to how much history is left out and how important women are to the world of drinking culture, brewing, wine, all of it. And for women, I really want them to know that they have a place here. They've always belonged in this culture. I think a lot of women are very intimidated by drinking culture, by bar culture, by wine, cocktails, all of that. And, we're in this great place in the world right now where we're trying to get more women everywhere, more women directing movies, more women writing, more women making wine. And that's amazing. And I'm behind it 5,000%. But I also want women to know that it's not a new thing. They've always belonged here. They've always had a place here. In fact, most types of alcohol, they were intrinsic to its creation, to its popularization. They were so influential in the way that all kinds of alcohol were served, were made, were drank. I really want women to feel comfortable and feel like they have a right to be in this culture.
Absolutely. I just think this is the perfect book for that. So you were researching with the challenges of COVID. You've launched your book, and although things are starting to open up, there aren't a lot of author events. So how have you been promoting the book? What things have you done to pivot?
Yeah, I did get to do an in-person launch, which was very fun, but I have done a lot of virtual events. A couple weeks ago, I got to do a great event with the women over at Freeland Spirits in Oregon, up in the Pacific Northwest, which was very fun getting to talk to virtually female distillers and distillery owners. That has been just a blast.
That's great. And have you noticed anything else that authors are doing? I'm just interested in book culture, how it's adapting to COVID. Is anybody doing anything interesting to launch books these days or promote them?
A lot of authors now work with bookstores to do virtual events. They'll do sort of live events on Instagram or Facebook. Everyone's trying to figure out something new and exciting to do. It's hard to keep virtual events exciting because we're all so used to doing it for work. So being in conversation is great. That's really, really helpful. People are doing panels with multiple authors. We're all just trying to adapt, as you said, trying to pivot to a brand new world.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, just some quick questions to finish off. You've told some wonderful stories. What's the last great book you read?
A nonfiction book called Fuzz by Mary Roach. She's my favorite science writer, and it's a book all about the times when nature and wildlife and animals have crossed paths with the law. And it is very, very funny and very, very interesting and very, very fun.
That sounds good. It sounds like a micro history right there. If you could share a drink with any person, living or dead, who would it be? What would you be drinking?
Certainly, it would be Bessie Williamson from this book, who's my favorite woman I featured in this book. I'd love to have some scotch with her in Scotland and get to talk to her all about her time as a distillery manager and all the fun stories she must have about working in scotch.
Oh, I love that. If you could put up a billboard in downtown Los Angeles, what would it say?
Buy Girly Drinks. It would definitely be a big Girly Drinks billboard for sure.
That's great. Not to get too down either, but what drink would you like served at your funeral? Long time from now.
Oh, probably a big, big punch. I love making a punch, especially a whiskey punch for holidays. For just this past Thanksgiving, I made a cranberry brandy punch. Punches to me are so much fun, and they're so about community and drinking together. And I would love just a big, fun punch, boozy punch served there.
Yeah, that's very communal. All right, as we wrap up here, is there anything we haven't covered you want to mention?
We went pretty far into the book.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit about bars and stuff, and I also want to mention one of my other favorite women in the book, Sunny Sun, during the Tiki chapter for the 1950s. A lot of people don't realize that the Tiki, which has been such a huge drinking phenomenon since the 1950s, really was all popularized by a woman named Sunny Sun. And it's so cool that this trend, this sort of almost subculture of the drinking world started because this woman wanted to create a bar that was appealing to female drinkers. So she really thought a lot about the fresh flowers, the soft tiki music, the ambiance of a tiki bar, the experience of women drinkers. And her story is just so much fun to me.
Oh, wow. I cannot wait to dive into this. So where can we find you online and your book?
The book is everywhere. The print edition and the ebook edition have photos, which are really, really fun. You can get them at your local bookstore, on the internet, everywhere. The audiobook is also available. I narrate it myself so that you can get that, Audible, Libro FM, everywhere you get audiobooks. And you can find me, MalloryO'Meara.com. There is a drinks pairing list on my website for the book. There's a playlist for all the women drinking songs I listened to while I was writing it.
Love it.
And there's some book recommendations as well on there. Recipe books and books like the biography about our pal Barb Nicole. So all kinds of fun extras up there if you are interested in the book or have already finished it.
That is great. Oh, Mallory, I hope this book does well. These stories deserve to be told. I can't wait to help spread that message. But thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. Wonderful stories. I just love it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been so much fun. I love talking about these women.
Absolutely. All right. Cheers. And we must meet for a drink sometime in person.
Absolutely.
All right.
Well, there you have it. I hope you enjoyed my chat with Mallory. Here are my takeaways. I love the story behind how the Cosmopolitan became an iconic cocktail on the TV show Sex and the City, especially because I loved that show when it first came out, and I'm now gobbling up every episode of the new reboot. There are just so many parallels with other industries, too. Like, you might not be able to afford the multi-$1,000 Versace outfit on the Paris runway, but you might be able to buy the perfume. The Cosmo was and is an aspirational drink for many women, and some men and non-binaries, too. Veuve Clicquot is a classic kick-ass woman's story from getting through the Napoleonic blockades to selling her jewelry to fund the business. Gotta love her bootstrapping approach. And 3, I loved hearing about the swashbuckling women responsible for America's increase in both scotch and bourbon consumption after Prohibition. All right, so as promised, before we wrap up, I'm going to share my favorite holiday wines with you, including those to pair with turkey dinner, serve at a cocktail party, or give someone as a gift. I'm chatting about these wines with Kathy Buckworth, who is the host of the Go-To Grandma podcast, covering topics of interest to grandparents from tech and travel to food and fitness. And she also has guest experts and interviews with notable grandparents. So while I'm far from being a grandparent, I love Kathy's energy and warmth. We had such fun talking about wine. You can catch her on the radio at 7:40 a.m. or 96.7 FM, as well as online at Zoomer Radio, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, and all the other places where you listen to podcasts. All right, here's the clip of our chat.
Natalie McLean offers popular online wine and food pairing courses at nataliemclean.com. She's the host of Unreserved Wine Talk, selected as one of the best drinks podcasts by the New York Times. Both of her books, Red, White, and Drunk All Over, A Wine-Soaked Journey from Grape to Glass, and Unquenchable, A Tipsy Quest for the World's Best Bargain Wines, were selected as an Amazon Best Books of the Year. She's the wine expert on CTV's The Social, CTV News, and Global Television's Morning Show. Natalie was named the world's best drinks journalist at the World Food Media Awards and has won 4 James Beard Foundation Journalism Awards. Good morning, Natalie McLean. 7:30 in the morning. What a great time to talk about wine.
Absolutely. It's never too early. The breakfast of champions, Kathy.
I am with you. I am with you on this. And we're obviously heading into a season where we are going to be tasting a lot of new wines, sampling some wines, sharing some wines. So I'm going to walk through a few holiday scenarios that maybe you can help me out with.
Great.
Okay, so first of all, wine at the big event, at Christmas dinner. Typically, we might be having turkey or ham. Does that matter? What types of wines would you suggest for Christmas dinner?
All right. So if you're serving the big bird, turkey tends to be a bit of a drier meat than, say, roast chicken or other poultry. So you want to moisten the bird. And so I suggest mouth-watering, juicy wines. So you might start with a bubbly anyway as a toast at the beginning of the meal, but that's also going to work well with turkey. So specifically, I'd recommend Peller Estate Cuvée Ice Wine. It's a sparkling rosé from Niagara.
Ooh.
Or Grey Monk Odyssey Rosé, sparkling from BC. So kind of in our backyard to start with. And also all Canadian wineries essentially now ship directly to your home. So you're supporting the local business, whether it's across the country, and getting a nice festive bubbly for your dinner. I'd also suggest a few other wines, maybe a Riesling from Germany, like Relax Riesling. I love the name of that. It's something we all need around the holidays.
Yeah, exactly.
La Crema Pinot Noir from California. And then if you want visions of sugar plums dancing in your head, go back to Niagara for Rife or Riverview Ice Wine.
Wow, those are, and you're right about ordering and having it delivered to your door. I'm in Mississauga, so from Niagara, it's not so far, and I've had many delivered to my front door. Many, let me tell you.
Well,
So
it's a great thing to support during the holidays because it is literally our highest value add grassroots industry. You support so many jobs and spin-off industries when you buy Canadian wine.
and then we get to drink it.
Exactly. And feel good about it.
It's a win-win. So speaking about feeling good about it, I am going to have a very tiny cocktail party. I've got air purifiers. Everyone has to be vaccinated, etc. But I am having a cocktail party. So what types of wines can I incorporate into like cocktails or just serving as, aperitifs at that type of situation?
Sure. So cocktail parties, it's always great to have some bubblies. So the 2 I mentioned already would work. Or try maybe a Prosecco from Italy. That's a sparkling wine. La Marca is a great one. They have like a
regular and a rosé. It's less than $15, so it's great value. Santa Margherita Pinot Grigio, something mouthwatering, not too heavy on the oak alcohol, or Ladybug Rosé from Niagara is beautiful. If you're serving little meaty hors d'oeuvres, then I would get maybe a more full body but still smooth red like Wakefield Shiraz from Australia. Essentially, you're looking for wines that aren't too heavy because people are going to be sipping throughout, and that will go with whatever nibbles you're serving, whether it's cheese or other types of hors d'oeuvres.
That's a great point. We think about the foods we're going to eat at bigger meals and what type of wine we would serve, but I haven't given as much thought to the appetizer side of that as well.
Exactly. So you don't want anything that's going to clobber your delicate little pate or whatever you're serving. So nothing too big and bulking.
Right, exactly. So maybe I'm getting invited out to a cocktail party, or I have people on my list that I know would appreciate a good wine. What are some of the top wines you're suggesting for this year? And maybe start with sort of, well, I know that person, but I don't want to spend a ton, all the way up to what is a really nice wine that I could gift a special friend with?
Exactly. So when you want to pour like Santa, but save like Scrooge,
Nice.
I gotcha. So gift wines, I do think bubbly is kind of the universal wine of celebration. And the La Marca I mentioned is less than $15. But if you want to scale up and go fancy, Veuve Clicquot champagne from France is a beautiful bottle for this time of year. It depends, again, on your budget and to whom you are giving it. But I find sparkling wine kind of is great when you don't know a person's taste. So that celebratory factor. And then I would go with, beyond that, switch hitter wines. So Pinot Noir or Riesling appeals to many palates. Again, if you don't know their taste, some of the ones that I've already mentioned, maybe one from 30 Bench in Niagara. And what makes a gift wine special, if you can, if you're visiting the wineries, get the winemaker to sign the bottle or get a case and get them all signed so that when you give them as gifts, it's got a little extra touch. Another thing you might pick up on is give them a bottle based on their origin story. So maybe the couple met in California, or their first apartment was there, or they got married there, or whatever. So Conundrum is a red and a white blend from California, is wonderful. And then you don't have to debate the wine anymore. You're no longer in that conundrum. But
Nice.
I'm biased, of course, Kathy, but I believe wine is the ultimate gift, no matter what you choose. I think so you can relax about it because one size fits all, unlike sweaters. Doubles are fine. Doubles are fine. It's easy to re-gift. You can be very sneaky about that. And it doesn't add to your clutter because you're going to consume the gift.
I love all of that. Thank you so much for being on this morning, Natalie, and cheers.
It's my pleasure, Kathy. Have a great holiday season.
You too.
Cheers.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
In the show notes, you'll find a full transcript of my conversation with both Mallory and Kathy, links to Mallory's new book, her podcast and website, as well as to Kathy's podcast and website, how you can join me in a free online wine and food pairing class, and where you can find the live stream of the video version of this conversation on Facebook and YouTube every Wednesday at 7 p.m. That's all in the show notes at nataliemaclean.com/159. So email me if you have a sip, a tip, a question, or want to be a beta reader of my new book at natalie@nataliemaclean.com. You won't want to miss next week when we chat with Beth Liston, a rebel winemaker from California who's just launched a new wine called Long Shot. In the meantime, if you missed episode 37, go back and take a listen. I chat about Veuve Clicquot in depth with the author of a fabulous book on her, Tilar Mazio. I'll share a short clip with you now to whet your appetite.
And some girlfriends and I agreed that Veuve Clicquot was our favorite champagne. And so we used to get together and drink a bottle of wine of an evening and have our husbands drive us home. We were talking one day and I remembered that Veuve in French is widow. And it really started with a question where I said, well, was there really a widow Clicquot? And ended up doing research and found this amazing story about a woman who not only became history's first international businesswoman, but who invented a process, which I know we can talk about a little bit, called remuage, that is still used in the wine industry today. And it was really the thing that moved champagne from being a luxury product that was so expensive that only the kings and queens of France could afford it, to a luxury product that those of us who are lucky of a weekend can take a sip of.
If you like this episode, please tell one friend about it this week, someone you know who might be interested in the wines and other drinks we discussed. Thank you for taking the time to join me here. I hope something great is in your glass this week. Perhaps a little bourbon or scotch that pairs well with holiday toasting and/or reading Mallory's new book. You don't want to miss one juicy episode of this podcast, especially the secret, full-bodied bonus episodes that I don't announce on social media. So, subscribe for free now at nataliemclain.com/subscribe. Meet me here next week. Cheers.